Earlier this season, I made some weekly preview videos about the NFL, along with my NFL review videos every week. I eventually got tired of doing the preview videos, but I decided to bring them back for the conference championship game and the Super Bowl because I'm a class act. We're down to the Final Four, and I'm ready to go. The video begins right after this. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, DraftKings Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner, and it's the perfect time to get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, they're giving all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. This is your shot to make every last play a moment to be remembered. Don't wait. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using code BARRY. The crown is yours. Stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets on DraftKings same-game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. Combine multiple bets together from the same game. Love the thrill of live betting? DraftKings has got you covered. Bet live on in-progress games right as they happen, making watching the game that much more exciting. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code BARRY and bet just $5 on any wager and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code BARRY only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Starting off with the NFC Championship game featuring my Philadelphia Eagles and a team from Washington. Starting off at the most important position, who has the quarterback advantage? It's a controversial one because Jalen Hurts is injured right now, and some people say that Jalen Hurts sucks anyway. And so far this postseason, he really hasn't been that great as a passer. And in a way, I admit they were lucky to get out of the game versus the Rams with a win with how Jalen was playing, but I think injury was a part of that. But he's going to try and play through it. Jalen is a game manager. There's no way around it. I'm not out of here pretending that he's the GOAT. I guess for me, I keep waiting to see that Super Bowl Jalen Hurts that we saw a couple years ago when he threw for over 300 yards. He's won 4 playoff games in his career, all at home, and in all 4 of those games, he failed to throw for more than 154 yards. So the Eagles' recipe for success is the ground game. But how does that spell for who has the better quarterback? The Commanders right now, obviously, we know Jaden Daniels is a great player. He's having one of the best rookie seasons ever, and in the playoffs so far, he's been on a heater, making throws. At this point in time, I'm going to have to give the advantage to Washington and Jaden Daniels. The running back advantage, this is where Philadelphia makes up for any advantage Washington might have at the quarterback position, because the Eagles have the best running back in the league this year in Saquon Barkley, running for over 2,000 yards. Kenneth Gainwell is also a nice option as a backup. And, Jalen Hurts, say what you want about him as a passer, but as a runner, he's one of the best running quarterbacks in the NFL. However, again, he might be dealing with an injury, but even last week, he ripped off a 40-yard touchdown run to begin the game. So when it comes to the tush push, when it comes to short yardage situations, the Eagles really are the best of the best when it comes to the running game. And that's not because Washington is terrible themselves. Washington as a running game is actually very good. They were 4th in the league this year in rushing touchdowns and yards per attempt, and Jaden Daniels was a big part of that. Brian Robinson Jr. is nice, but the Eagles are the best running team in the NFL, so they get the edge here. Wide receiver advantage, and then just to loop it all in, I'm including tight ends here because that's basically what tight ends are nowadays, is glorified receivers. Names-wise, the Eagles win this pretty handily. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. Saquon is a capable back out of the backfield at catching the ball. Terry McLaurin's a good receiver. He has a lot of good PR, though. Like, he's a good receiver. He's not a superstar receiver, but he's a star receiver. After him, Dynami Brown is okay. Thus far in the playoffs, which is a small sample size, 2 games, the Commanders, I almost said a naughty word, the Commanders receivers have been more productive, but I don't know if that's a reflection of that they're better. It's just more so they've had to throw the ball a lot more. Zach Ertz is also obviously a great security blanket for a rookie like Daniels as a last resort. If you're going just by the playoffs, Washington would have the advantage here, but at a certain point, I feel like A.J. Brown, who's been pretty lackluster thus far this postseason, dropped a couple passes last week. I think he's going to step his game up. I think Devonta Smith will make some big plays. I think that the Eagles have the edge at receiver position, although it's not quite as wide of a gap based solely on the playoffs. But if you're going totality regular season and playoffs, the Eagles get the nod, in my opinion. Now we get to the big uglies up front, and I fully admit this. I admitted this last year when I did previews for playoff games last year. Whenever it came to the line of scrimmage, specifically the offensive line, I would kind of just put my faith in PFF and people who watch every offensive snap, because let's be honest, folks, not a lot of us are going to be sitting here looking at every snap every offensive lineman in the NFL is doing unless we're getting paid to do it. And the Eagles offensive line won the PFF Offensive Line of the Year award. I know some of you probably don't think that means anything, but I think Jordan Mailata's become one of the best players, offensive lineman in the league. Lane Johnson is an all-pro. Cam Jurgens has basically done about as good of a job as you can replacing a legend in Jason Kelsey. The only real, Mekhi Becton, he can be inconsistent, but overall, I would say that the Eagles have the edge on the offensive line. Now we get to defense, and you just look at the numbers. The Eagles defensively finished the year second in points allowed per drive, and they were first in yards allowed per drive. Vic Fangio has been a very, very great coordinator for many years for a lot of teams, and that's no different here. Although in their last meeting with Washington, I might point out, Washington did put up 36 and Jaden Daniels threw 5 touchdowns. But so far, in the 2 postseason games, the Eagles have forced 6 turnovers, which have really helped. Zach Bond's first-team All-Pro at linebacker. Jalen Carter, we have all the vehicular manslaughter jokes, but he is scary when he's motivated. I think it's between him and Dexter Lawrence as the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL. I would throw Chris Jones in there, but Chris Jones, he's kind of all over the place. Whereas Jalen Carter in the middle, he's unstoppable. Quinyon Mitchell has been one of the best rookie cornerbacks in recent memory, although he did get hurt, dinged up, but he seems like he'll play. Losing Nakobe Dean a couple weeks ago did hurt. He was their second leading tackler on the season. But the Eagles overall have an elite defensive unit, and Washington does not. Washington finished outside the top 20 this year in both points and yards per drive. And honestly, that really hasn't changed very much in the postseason. They really didn't play a great game versus Tampa, but they got the 1 turnover deep in Tampa territory, which was because of Baker Mayfield fumbling. Last week versus the Lions was kind of an outlier. In their first 18 games, Washington forced no more than 2 turnovers in any game, but against Detroit, they forced 5. 3 Jared Goff interceptions, which was a pick 6 thrown in there. They had a Jameson Williams interception. They recovered a fumble. So I think even though last week versus the Lions, they had a bunch of turnovers, I don't think that's indicative of something that's consistent or that's going to happen. And also, even if you include all the turnovers and the pick 6, they still gave up 31 points. So this Washington defense is not as good as Philadelphia's defense. So the edge here goes to Philadelphia pretty easily. Moving on to special teams, we start off with the place kickers. Jake Elliott, it's been a very weird year for him, been a very bad year for him. He's a Super Bowl champion. He's played in 2 Super Bowls. He's made clutch kicks before, but he hit just 78% of his field goals this year. And even just last week versus the Rams, he missed 2 extra points, which could have cost the Eagles their season. If the Rams had just one, the Rams were 20 yards away from ending the Eagles season, and in large part was because Jake Elliott missed 2 extra points. However, he did somewhat make up for those missed extra points with a couple tough field goals in the snow. Zane Gonzalez, he's been a journeyman. He's only played a handful of games, but he made even fewer of his field goals percentage-wise this year in the regular season than Jake Elliott. He also barely made the game-winning field goal versus Tampa, as we all know. It doinked off the upright. But Zane Gonzalez, he missed a field goal last week that could have officially ended the game versus the Lions. I don't really have a lot of faith in Zane Gonzalez, but I do have more faith in Jake Elliott to make a big kick than I do in Zane Gonzalez, so I'll give the Eagles the edge there. Then we go on to punting. Tressway, he's been a long-time punter. There's not a lot of significant differences here, in my opinion. The net yards per punt, Tressway beats Braden Mann by about a yard. I will say, though, the inside the 20 percentage, Tressway, 44% of his punts put Washington opponents inside their own 20. He had just 2 touchbacks. His touchback percentage is much, much lower than Braden Mann's. So I think if you're looking for precision and accuracy, I probably would give the advantage to Washington in terms of punters, but I don't look at the punt situation as a glaring weakness or a liability for the Eagles. So overall, when it comes to special teams, I'm going to say this is a toss-up. Now we get to the coaching advantage, and we all love Nick Sirianni. We all love Nick Sirianni, don't we? He's probably the most hated coach in the NFL, and it's very weird because really ever since he took over for Doug Peterson in 2021, in his 4 years, Nick Sirianni, really all he's done is won games at a very high level. In his career, in the regular season, he has a winning percentage of about 71%, which is historically great. The Eagles have multiple 14-win seasons. This is their second NFC Championship game appearance in 3 years. They've made a Super Bowl. They came close to winning the Super Bowl, but yet Sirianni still is not considered a great coach. He's considered kind of an anchor, but again, coaching just is not the head coach. This goes to assistant coaches as well. Kellen Moore, first-year offensive coordinator, seemed to get Jalen Hurts back on track quarterback after Jalen Hurts had a bad year last year with Brian Johnson as the offensive coordinator, and then there was, Matt Patricia and shit defensively. It was just a clusterfuck for the Eagles last year. But again, I mentioned Vic Fangio earlier in the video. He's one of the most legendary defensive minds in the game. So I think that whatever faults Sirianni has as a head coach, that the coordinators, somewhat similar to how it was in 2022 when Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon were there, where the coordinators are enough to cover up whatever flaws Sirianni has, and that's why the Philadelphia Eagles have been able to win so consistently. Whereas we get to Dan Quinn with Washington. Dan Quinn, he's done, his record says he's not a terrible coach. His record, he has a career winning percentage of 54%. This is his third time making the playoffs, and but I'm sorry, but he's never going to live down 28-3. I'm sorry, I just can't get that out of my mind. It's like, yes, he's made a Super Bowl before with the Falcons, and it was actually somewhat impressive after that meltdown that he was able to get the Falcons back to the playoffs the year after that meltdown, where they ended up losing to the Eagles in 2017 at the goal line. But the thing is, he's supposed to be a defensive-minded guy, and his defenses aren't good. So I don't feel like Dan Quinn, he was the Seahawks defensive coordinator when they were the Legion of Boom, and then so that's how he got the Falcons job, and the defenses for the Falcons were always terrible when he was there. And then he goes to the Cowboys, and they had good defensive numbers there, but then he comes back to Washington, and Washington this year has won mostly in spite of their defense. So, I don't think Dan Quinn's a great head coach. I think he's one of those guys who's a great coordinator, but then you look at the coordinators for Washington, it's like, oh, Cliff Kingsbury, his offenses historically have done really, really well in the first half of seasons, and then once November hits, they normally they get on a downward slope. This might honestly be the biggest argument in favor of Jaden Daniels being special, is that the Commanders' offense is still doing this. So I don't particularly think Cliff Kingsbury is a great offensive coordinator, or a head coach, certainly, for that matter. I mean, look, this guy had a losing record with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback at Texas Tech. I mean, that should be impossible. But again, the old adage is great quarterbacks give offensive coordinators head coaching jobs. Bad quarterbacks get offensive coordinators fired. Overall, though, I'm going to give the coaching advantage to the Eagles. So now that we've taken a look at it, who's going to win this game? I think, and this is an unbiased opinion, I think the Eagles will win this game. They won against Washington at home this year pretty decisively. The final score is a little bit deceptive there, but they beat Washington at home pretty decisively. And they were going to beat Washington on the road as well, if not for a crucial job by Devonta Smith. I think the Eagles are the better team. They should win this game. No rookie quarterback has ever made the Super Bowl, and I think that's going to continue. Jaden Daniels, though, has obviously shown he is the real deal moving forward. But again, the Eagles are at home. I think they're going to control the game on the ground, chew up clock. Jaden Daniels won't get as many possessions. I don't see the Eagles turning the ball over 5 times the way that the Lions did last week. I think the Eagles win this one, but Daniels will put up a fight. I think the Eagles win 31-24. Now it's time for the AFC Championship preview between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. Starting off with the quarterback advantage, and this is, again, where a lot of the game is going to be decided. One of the best rivalries ever, quarterback or otherwise, is Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes, although in a way it really hasn't been a rivalry because thus far, Allen is 0-3 versus Mahomes. In the postseason, there's no question that over the last several seasons in the regular season, Allen has been better than Mahomes, but this is going off of track record. Patrick Mahomes he's in different conversations than Josh Allen is. Patrick Mahomes is constantly in GOAT conversations. Josh Allen is more of, is he a top 15 quarterback? Is he a Hall of Famer? He doesn't have any MVPs. It's different levels, okay? And that's what happens when one guy has 3 Super Bowl rings and the other guy has none. And some people might say, oh, well, that's a bad way to judge quarterback. The thing is that, and people will say, oh, it's rigged for the Chiefs or whatever. Whatever. I think that at the end of the day, when the chips are down, Mahomes is inevitable. He just is. He just finds ways to beat you. He's done it with the Bills. I think both these guys obviously are great quarterbacks, and I think if it was anybody else, I would give the edge to the Bills, but you got to go with Patrick Mahomes. He's won 2 straight Super Bowls. He's on track to possibly three-peat, the first time that's ever happened in the Super Bowl era. He just comes through in big moments way more often than he doesn't, so I just got to give the edge to Mahomes. The running back advantage, Kansas City Chiefs are not a great running team. They've had injuries with Pacheco. They got Kareem Hunt out of jail somewhere probably. There's not a lot. They just don't have a lot of, their ground game isn't very threatening. They were 29th this year in yards per carry. They're only 15th in touchdowns. They're just not a great running team. Whereas the Buffalo Bills they finished first this year in rushing touchdowns. They were just outside the top 10 in yards per attempt. But Josh Allen is also, as we know, he's a great running quarterback, great around the goal line, another push guy, just like Jalen Hurts. But again, to go back, again, we all know Mahomes, though. Mahomes seems to pull those sneaky 20-yard runs out of his ass at the most crucial moments. So Mahomes is obviously a capable scrambler. We've seen that. I think Allen's obviously a better runner than Mahomes is, but I think the edge here has to go to the Buffalo Bills. Wide receiver advantage, and this obviously is including tight ends as well, and that's important because Travis Kelce is obviously still the biggest weapon for Mahomes. Until Kelce retires, which might be after this year, he's always going to be the guy that Mahomes goes to in big spots. We saw it last week versus Houston. He somehow is always wide open despite running a 6'5" 40 and having like zero wiggle. I don't know how he gets open, but the Mahomes to Kelce connection is historic. There's always that, and that has to factor into the discussion here. I'm still not super impressed. Xavier Worthy, for all the speed he has, he really hasn't made a lot of big plays downfield this year. They usually use him in a lot of short throws, screens, gadget plays like that. Hollywood Brown is just getting back into the swing of things, hasn't really done much. Obviously, we all know Rashee Rice, he's not going to play, he's done for the year. DeAndre Hopkins, kind of forget about him. He seems to be kind of washed up. Names-wise, I would say that the Chiefs have the edge here. You look at Buffalo, though, Khalil Shakir has been the leading receiver thus far for the Bills in the postseason. The Bills don't really have a star receiver, obviously, ever since they got rid of Stephon Diggs. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox are solid tight ends. Mac Hollins, just a lot of solid guys, but really no stars. Although perhaps down the line, maybe Keon Coleman could be a star, but we have to wait and see with that. But anyway, so I'm going to give the edge here to the Chiefs, but really, I don't think either one of these teams have a great receiving core. But I will give the Chiefs the edge because of the Mahomes-Kelce connection still being lethal when they absolutely need it. When the chips are down, Mahomes is going to go to Kelce, and somehow that motherfucker is always open. So I give the Chiefs the edge at wide receiver, although I don't think either of these teams' receiving cores are the strength of their teams. We now get to the offensive line advantages, and I would say that this is basically a toss-up. I think the Bills, they have a lot of good linemen. I think that the Chiefs, their biggest problem with the Chiefs all year long was outside pressure with the left tackle position. That's why they had to move Joe Thuney out to be left tackle. But in interior-wise, when you got Creed Humphrey and you got Joe Thuney, you got all pros there. The Chiefs are just monsters in terms of up the middle interior blocking, but they struggle with the tackle positions. Juwan Taylor, he's famous for jumping off sides and holding. He's actually a solid player, though, by the numbers. And just going off of what I've read about sites that track these types of things, it is pretty much a toss-up. However, something tells me, I remember before Super Bowl 55 when there was a couple injuries, and ironically enough, that was the last time the Bills and the Chiefs played in the AFC Championship game, and the Chiefs suffered some major injuries on their offensive line. And going into Super Bowl 55, I said, you know what? I don't think a big deal. It's just one position. Mahomes can overcome it. And there's no injuries I can think of right now for the Chiefs offensive line. But that left tackle position has been a massive Achilles heel all year long for Kansas City. And there's just a sneaking suspicion that it might come back to fuck them at the worst possible time. And so I don't think Buffalo's offensive line has any clear-cut weaknesses or weak spots like that. So in the end, I'll give Buffalo the slight advantage on the offensive line, just because the Kansas City Chiefs at the left tackle spot are so bad, basically negates the all-pros they have in the middle. Now looking at defense, this is tricky because the Chiefs, if you look at just the raw numbers, the raw points per game, the Chiefs have the 4th-ranked defense in the league, but that's largely because the Chiefs' offense was the best in the league, literally, in terms of prolonging drives and chewing up clock. So raw numbers-wise, the Chiefs' defense looks good, but on a per-drive basis, the Chiefs' defense isn't really that impressive. They're 13th in points allowed per drive, and they were 24th in yards allowed per drive. Although they did step up versus Houston in the divisional round, this isn't exactly, they don't really force a lot of turnovers. They had that one monster turnover game versus the Browns in mid-December, but otherwise, this isn't a defense that really forces a lot of turnovers, whereas the Chiefs, on the other hand, have gone 8 straight games without committing a turnover. So the Chiefs defense, it obviously, big name is Chris Jones, first-team All-Pro. Trent McDuffie is a great cornerback. The Chiefs defense is improved from where they were earlier in Mahomes' career, but Allen has shown, and he does this to a lot of defenses, that's why he's a great player, but Josh Allen has shown that he can carve up the Chiefs defense, even in the postseason, particularly the last 2 times these teams have met, but it hasn't hasn't mattered because the Chiefs have made just enough plays and Mahomes made just enough plays in order to get them out of it, famously the 13 seconds game. So the Chiefs defense is really, kind of mid, but on the surface, they look good because of the Chiefs offense chewing up a lot of clock. But this is a vulnerable defense. They can be had if the Chiefs offense has a game where they're not able to sustain drives. For the Bills defensively, not much better, surprisingly. They were 18th in points allowed per drive in the regular season, 26th in yards allowed per drive. They did not have a great game versus Baltimore, which is interesting. They forced 3 turnovers versus Baltimore. They had the interception, they had a couple fumble recoveries, but they did not have a good game defensively versus Baltimore, and they got out of it. Earlier this year, they had 2 games in a row where they gave up back-to-back 40-point games. So this is a defensive unit that probably should be better than it is if you're looking at just the names. But it seems that this unit has kind of regressed from past years and isn't as solid as past years. So I believe that looking at it, I would give the edge Kansas City, but neither, we're not talking about the 85 Bears here. We're not talking about the no-fly zone Broncos or the Legion of Boom. Neither of these teams defensively are great. I will say, though, that Buffalo was able to force a couple interceptions off of Patrick Mahomes in Buffalo, and since then, Mahomes has not thrown an interception. Knock on wood, might be some regression coming now. But yeah, the last team to intercept Patrick Mahomes was the Buffalo Bills several months ago. But I give the defensive edge to the Chiefs. Special teams advantage, kicking-wise, it's about equal. Harrison Butker, we all know that he's famous for his off-field opinions. On the field, though, he's been one of the most clutch kickers, really, if you look at it. During the run that the Chiefs have had since Mahomes became starter, Butker's been there every step of the way, and he's been great in the postseason. He's been clutch in the postseason. And you look at Tyler Bass, solid kicker, but he was the reason why the Chiefs were able to beat Buffalo last year. Not the only reason, but a big reason, because he whiffed on the chip shot field goal at the end of the game, which allowed the Chiefs to win and squeak out a victory on the road last year. So I'd give the edge at kicker to the Chiefs. When you go to the punters, you got Matt Araiza and Sam Martin. Araiza had a higher net yards per punt average, but he also had a much higher touchback percentage. He had a lower inside the 20 percentage than Sam Martin did. So Sam Martin might not have as powerful of a leg as Matt Araiza does, but he might be a little bit more precise with it. So I give the edge at punting to the Bills. Overall, though, I would say that when it comes down to special teams, I think that you got to give Kansas City the advantage here, because Harrison Butker, like him or not, is one of the clutchest kickers in the history of the NFL, and I don't think the difference in punting is large enough to make up for that fact. And also the fact that we've seen Tyler Bass, miss when the pressure was on, so that doesn't help. If we finally get to the coaching advantage, this season, Andy Reid is probably the best coach in the NFL, and rightfully so. He's won 273 games. He's won 65% of his games in his career. With Kansas City, he's won at least 75% of his games. He's known as an offensive mind, an offensive genius. He's won 27 playoff games now. It's weird because, he was once known as a playoff choker, but now he's got 3 Super Bowl rings and is looking for a 4th. Now, I will say, though, that, Matt Nagy as an offensive coordinator, not a great offensive coordinator. Mahomes' numbers since Matt Nagy took over offensive coordinator have plummeted. I don't think that's a coincidence. Steve Spagnuolo, though, is one of the most celebrated and decorated defensive coordinators in NFL history, so he's there. Whereas Sean McDermott, you got Sean McDermott, not really well liked by a lot of people. There's a lot of 9/11 jokes in there, and he just seems like a bit of a grouch. But ever since he took over the Bills, they've made the playoffs 7 out of 8 times. He's won 66% of his games. They just haven't been able to break through in the playoffs. Having Josh Allen certainly helps. At the end of the day, though, Andy Reid or Sean McDermott, you're going to give the edge to Andy Reid because he's got 3 rings, and he's played in 5 Super Bowls. And this is, how many AFC championship games, how many conference championship games has Andy Reid been in by this point? This is going to be Andy Reid's 12th conference championship game as a head coach. So he's essentially almost had a full season worth of conference championship games under his belt. So yeah, the edge to coaching goes to Kansas City. This really is a tough decision because both of these teams, every time they meet up, it seems like it comes down to a couple plays. Last year, Buffalo, they had Kansas City on the ropes. If the receivers had been able to catch some passes that Allen threw instead of dropping them, maybe that would have been different. But so Kansas City squeaked out of there with a win. Then obviously we remember 2021, the infamous 13 seconds game. Kansas City was able to squeak out the win there. The only in the 3 playoff matches these teams have had, the only game that wasn't close was the first AFC Championship game back in 2020. The Chiefs won that pretty pretty handily. The last 2 times, though, it seems like the Chiefs escaped with a victory. The Bills basically did everything except win the game. So there is absolutely a chance that the Bills finally knock down the door and break through and get over the Mahomes monster. But I don't think that's going to happen, because at a certain point, I think that Patrick Mahomes is going to turn on his GOAT shit, and he's going to do just enough at home to get Kansas City back to the Super Bowl and cock block the Bills and Josh Allen for the 4th time in 5 years. Last year, just not to brag, but last year, I correctly predicted the outcome of their divisional round matchup, the final score and everything. I said it was going to come down to a field goal. I think it's going to come down to a field goal again this year. I got the Chiefs winning this one 30-27.